Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the Last Round Boxing Podcast after a major event at BMO Stadium here in the Los Angeles area where the LAFC, Los Angeles Football Club, that's their stadium. That's where they play their games here in Southern California. Obviously there was a big event there. It was Saudi Arabia's Riyadh season, their first inaugural, event in the States, and we'll touch on it in a second. But we wanted to remind you guys that we are on YouTube now. The last couple months, every episode that is uploaded goes straight to our YouTube channel. If you just search the Last Round Podcast or the Last Round Boxing Podcast in your YouTube search bar, you should be able to see our cartoon logo on there, and then it should pop up. Or you can go to youtube.com/the Last Round Boxing Podcast. So if you prefer YouTube as your go-to audio listening, we are now on there. If you have YouTube Premium, obviously you have no ads, at least the YouTube ads. Actually, no, I don't think it's like ads at all, at least from where we upload. But if you prefer YouTube, like I mentioned, we are now on YouTube, the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Search it, and we should pop up. Jumping straight back into it, fight reviews. This past Saturday, the 3rd of August, from the BMO Stadium, as I mentioned, in Los Angeles, California, on DAZN pay-per-view for the WBA and WBO Super Welterweight Championships of the world. Terence Crawford remains undefeated at 41-0 with the 12-round unanimous decision win over Israel Madrimov, who takes the first loss of his career. Crawford wins by scores of 115-111 twice. 115-113, twice, and 116-112. The fight obviously went the full 12 rounds. This was Crawford's debut, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was his debut at 154. Fighting one of those Eastern European fighters. I mean, those guys can fight. Obviously, Madrimov didn't have the name recognition coming into the fight in comparison to Crawford, but Madrimov came to fight. I saw the consensus was that Crawford did edge it out. Obviously, he had a tougher time than usual because of, Crawford already had all this momentum coming off of the Spence fight, being looked at as pound for pound, and just having the anointed special title of a special fighter and all that. But it kind of quieted down. It quieted some of the Canelo Alvarez talk for Terence Crawford. People were before this fight, they were talking about that fight, like, oh, Crawford and Canelo should fight. Crawford should go up all the way to 168, which is a huge jump, from 147 to 168, 20 pounds, 21 pounds. I think that was already a leap, but the spectacle of it, and Crawford being such a dominant fighter between 140 and 147, and so those lucrative weight classes, it added an intrigue to fighting a superstar like Canelo, who dominated from 154 to 168 and also winning a title at 175. So, there was a mystique there, but obviously, like I mentioned, it quieted those concerns and those yells for that fight. But focusing back on the Madrimov fight, Mike, what did you think about Madrimov's performance? What did you think about Crawford's performance? And what did you think about the decision?
It was a slow burner, especially for the people who wanted, action. It was more of a technical fight, Madrimov constantly feinting and, trying to make Terence Crawford kind of bite on something, which he didn't. Just, he's so calm in the pocket. He would never really would bite. And then Crawford would kind of try to set something up, and Madrimov would like never bite as well. And it's kind of just a lot of rounds of feint. And then kind of towards the end, both of them kind of bit down a little bit more. And then Crawford at times would kind of like, bait him to come in, hoping Madrimov would throw so he could counter on something. But it was super hard to score, I thought, just because there wasn't really a lot to judge, because it didn't seem like there was a lot thrown.
And you were there ringside for the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I was there ringside, so it was...
So you had a different eye, you weren't all the way up in the stands, all the way at the top. You were there ringside, so you had a little bit different view as opposed to on TV.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so it was hard to. I honestly thought it was like super hard to judge. I could have seen it really of like a one round, like a 7-5 to Crawford, a draw, or even 7-5 to Madrimov, just because there wasn't really a lot to judge on. But there was other people there, and I won't name names of the other people who were referees and judges, and I asked them like, hey, like you're an official judge, how did you have it? And everyone said Crawford. So maybe they've more experienced than I am in that type of role, and they all said that they thought Crawford took it. But it was close. It was generally like a 7-5 type of scoreline when I asked those people as well. So yeah, it wasn't the best fight for, to watch in terms of wasn't many eye-catching shots or knockdowns or anything like that. Definitely one for more of a fan of the sweet science. So
as I mentioned, it was Crawford's debut at 154. Getting in there in his debut matchup against somebody like Madrimov. That's a huge, I mean, arguably, especially now after this past Saturday, Madrimov has shown that, anybody else at 154, like, he's a real threat, So he's going to be one of those high risk, low reward guys like Dimitri Bivol has been for many years of his career, in terms of like, you don't bring any financial leverage or reward to the table, and you're too much of a threat with your fighting skills. I think he's going to be within that realm because, their talent just exceeds their popularity, which isn't his fault, but, he's obviously talented. And I think that, like, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously for Crawford, he came away, he won a title or two, right? WBA and WBO in his... Is it fourth weight class or third weight class?
Fourth,
right? 135, 140, 147, 154. So for Crawford, it's a big accomplishment. 4-division champion, world champion. But he had a tough time, as I mentioned. And, Crawford was one of those fighters. I mean, he still is, but he's one of those fighters that had that mystique surrounding him that pound for pound, this guy dominates, especially how he dominated somebody like Errol Spence last year, which was, about a year ago, a little over a year ago or something. And with Spence also being very, very good and world championship caliber, and both were on a collision course for so many years, and Crawford just mopped the floor with him, that also solidified Crawford's pathway and what people think about him as a fighter. Like, oh, this guy's levels above all these fighters are in and around his weight class. So let me ask you this. Because it's not to say that Madrimov didn't come out of that fight with some credit and some stock, even though he was on the losing end. But if you had to look at it, who came out, and I know Crawford, as I mentioned, he won the titles and all that, but who came out kind of earning the more stock, whether it was on the losing side or the winning side? Who came out earning the more stock for their career going forward?
Strangely, maybe Madrimov, because I think his was so low.
That's what I was thinking too. Crawford got stock. He got stock from the fight. It's not that he didn't, but I'm talking about in terms of, not like necessarily more than the other, I guess, but what's more impactful going forward in their careers.
Yeah, because to the general casual fan, as we always say,
yeah,
Crawford was known. Madrimov wasn't. You'd have to be more of a fan like us, where you watch everything to really know who Madrimov was. And, I think, the normal fan would be like, well, I know who Crawford is. How come Crawford didn't knock this guy out? They didn't know that Madrimov was, Asian Games champion, World Championships in the amateurs, something ridiculous like 350 wins in the amateurs.
Yeah.
His stock
He's one of those Eastern European guys, man. Him, Lomachenko, all those guys, they have the same regimen.
That's why, he was so calm, collected in there, and it was such a hard fight for, Terence Crawford, which, now, like you said, a lot of people are going to be like, well, he couldn't beat Madrimov. It's probably due to the size. He's got no chance against someone like Canelo. But when you looked at it, Crawford didn't look small in there. He went in at 154. He was super ripped, in good shape. I imagine if he does face Canelo, he'll probably come in slightly under 168. And then also styles make fights. When he fights Canelo's not got the footwork he used to have. His footwork's going to be nothing like Madrimov's. He's not going to be literally constantly feinting. That's all Madrimov did. If you watch him, his arms are constantly back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, trying to mentally drain you because you're like, is he going to throw? Is he going to throw? Is he going to throw? Constantly, because you don't know. Because his arms, they keep constantly moving. You don't know when and where it's coming from. And that stresses you out and tires you.
Touching on the Crawford Canelo prospects and all that, this fight, I don't want to say derailed, but it did quiet down the calls for that fight. But I still think, and tell me if you agree or not, I still think that, and this is mainly a reason why, obviously it's box office. Like, if the fight was still made, let's just say in May of next year between Crawford and Canelo, Crawford moves up, people will tune in because it's still intriguing. Because Crawford now, even though he had a little bit harder time in beating Madrimov, he still won and he still fought very well, and he's now a 4-division champ in a brand new weight class. Canelo is also a multi-division champ from 154 to 160, 168, and 175. They're both 4-division champs now. And so, but this is, there's kind of two reasons, but the main reason, and tell me if you agree, as I mentioned, the main reason why I think Crawford will still be on the radar for somebody like Canelo is because Canelo is literally out of opponents. I mean, the fact that he's fighting Berlanga tells you everything you need to know. I know we still have Benavidez there, but let's just say he fights Benavidez next in May. Like maybe there's a rematch if it's a good fight or something, but who else is left in the opponent selection for Canelo? Like Canelo's been around for like essentially two generations of fighter selections. He fought Mayweather, he fought Mosley, he fought Cotto, Triple G, Chavez Jr. Now he's fighting Berlanga, a younger guy, like Caleb Plant. So Canelo's like he's still at 33, but he's an older grizzled veteran at 33. And there's some fighters who don't hit their peak until they're 33. But Canelo's like a grizzled veteran with a lot of miles on his tank at 33. So it's natural that he's already, being the superstar that he has been for years, he's kind of went through the list. He's fought everybody in terms of marquee matchups and that will deliver any type of intrigue. So that's why I think that Crawford still has a significant chance to land that fight in either May or September of next year, because Canelo is out of opponents. There's nobody there. Am I wrong, or what do you think?
No, you're 100%. He's going to have to start recycling them. I know that you know him better than me, but Chava from ESPN.
Right. ESPN Deportes or something.
So he released today saying that Eddie Reynoso has revealed that they're eyeing a potential fight for Canelo in Japan for December, if, probably when, he beats Edgar Berlanga on September 14th.
I mean, like, look you got to give it to Canelo. I mean, I've had a couple people message me when the Berlanga fight was announced, asking like, who is this guy? Who is this kid? How come he's not fighting Benavidez, or why is he fighting this guy? So like, I get it. But you got to give it to Canelo that he's literally, if he's going to go fight in Japan in December or whatever, you got to give it to him that he's at least trying to milk every last drop out of that bottle of his career. Because he's literally like, can you really criticize him? Like, he's always going to get criticized. Like, he always says, he was like, oh, like people like for the last couple of years, they've been saying, oh, Benavidez, you need to fight Benavidez. How come you're not fighting Benavidez? And, and he had a point when he's answering interviews. He's like, it's always somebody new. He's like, that's just the nature of the game when you're at the top. He's like, for years, it was Golovkin. He's like, oh, when are you going to fight Golovkin? He's like, I fought him 3 times. He's like, and then it was this person. He's like, and now it's Benavidez. He's like, so that's what happens when you're at the top. They're always going to criticize you. He's like, you're going to have your fans, but when you're at the top, if you don't have critics, something might be wrong. So you can't really like reasonably criticize him in terms of like he hasn't earned that spot that he's at because he's literally fought everybody. He's put on marquee events, big financial successful events. Like he hasn't been one of those fighters that like, oh, he fought this lower level guy. He's been a multi-division champ, but he fought these no-name guys, I mean, would you really compare, let's just say Adrian Broner. Isn't Adrian Broner also a 4-division champion?
Mm-hmm.
Canelo's a 4-division champion. And I'm sure you don't look at those careers as the same just because they both won championships in 4 different weight classes, right? Like, it's not the same.
No.
It's not the same. So I think going back to the Crawford situation, I think it's still on the table, man. I think it's still on the table. Even if he looked good and he got Madrimov out of there, obviously it would have helped, I mean, actually, let me ask you this question. Do you think Crawford looking how he did this past Saturday where he got the win, but, he had some difficulty with Madrimov? Do you think that kind of still helped? That actually helped him in his quest or the people's quest to get the Canelo fight in the next 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, I'd imagine it probably did. The fact that he kind of struggled to break him down just because they were essentially so good, both such high quality boxers that, yeah, I'm sure Canelo probably thought, okay, he struggled with Madrimov a little bit and he's this naturally smaller guy. I'm sure Canelo's like, bring it. I've seen and done everything. I've fought big guys before, so, bring it on. When he's fighting someone like a Bivol or a Kovalev at 175,
right.
He's probably thinking to himself, like, fight Crawford, who's probably naturally a 140.
Yeah. You also got to think about it, too. I didn't mention this at the beginning when I said that the primary reason that he could still get the fight is because Canelo's has run out of opponents, essentially. So, if this was like 2018 or something, then Crawford would never got the fight. But because the selection for Canelo is extremely, extremely limited, it puts Crawford higher on that list to get that fight sometime next year. But the second reasoning, and this is just me speculating, but we also got to think about Jermell Charlo had to step in for his brother, and Jermell Charlo was a champion at 154 and went all the way to 168 to fight Canelo. So maybe Crawford's going to be like, man, he's like, this guy did it at 154 and he went up to 168 and he didn't really put on a good performance, but Crawford might be like, I can do it and I'll look better than him. So I think that's another reason too, and obviously Canelo's open to it. He's like, oh, I'll let this guy, if he was going to fight the bigger Jermall Charlo, who was the 160 champion. And then, he had his issues, his personal issues. So Jermell Charlo had to slide in from 154 to 168. But, it was like, in terms of marketing, Jermell Charlo was like unified, undisputed or whatever at 154. Canelo was undisputed at 168. There was good marketing behind it. Like, oh, both multi-champions. I mean, Crawford's 4-division champ, got 2 belts at 154. the marketing behind it, and I think more people would be intrigued by a Crawford going up to 168 versus Canelo than they were by Charlo. Right?
No, 100%. I think if you look,
because who is Crawford going to fight next? Like, what's literally next? Charlo's not going to fight the guy. Like, those guys are I think they're kind of, they're on their way out. Like,
yeah. I would assume his aim would be, if the Canelo fight is just a pipe dream, 3-weight undisputed. We've never seen that,
No, right. Well, who are the other champions? This is for the WBA and WBO. So he has 2 titles now. Who has the IBF and who has the WBC? Is it still Charlo? Does Charlo still have the WBC?
I think he still has something.
I bet you he does. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. Maybe I should put it like that.
IBF is Bakran Murtazaliev. WBC, Fundora.
Oh, Fundora. Okay. You know what? That's right. I forgot about Fundora. Hey, Crawford Fundora, people would tune into that.
And the WBO. So the Crawford has the WBO interim. Fundora has the WBO world.
Oh, okay. So
he also has a WBC. Yeah, because you remember when he stepped in at the last minute?
Right. That's right. So Crawford, you're right. Haven't become undisputed. But I have, and Crawford obviously wants money fights now. Like he's already said, I get it. You get to that level. Have him go against Fundora, 6'5".
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Imagine that 6.
Yeah, and you know how much marketing it would get just because of Fundora's like height and how he looks at that weight class. Like, just think about it.
Luckily, Fundora doesn't fight tall.
Right. He fights on the inside.
Yeah, so it's kind of good for Crawford if he goes down that route.
Right. So, yeah, I think Crawford's going to try to focus his... obviously he can focus it on... who has the IBF? It was like a Russian...
Modatilias.
Obviously he can focus on that and try to get that belt, and then... But honestly, if I was him, money-wise, I know he said that he wants big-time fights, I would go straight to Fundora if Canelo's not there. Try to make Canelo for next May. If it doesn't work, then go after Fundora. I think that's your list ranking right there in terms of marquee financial events, which have intrigue behind the matchups, right? Haven't become undisputed at 154. Fight Fundora, Canelo, and then Fundora. Those are his choices. Canelo doesn't work, try to make a fight with Fundora. That's all you can do, right? And honestly, with these, Fundora was a Al Heyman fighter, PBC. It's obviously, it seems like a lot of these windows or a lot of these, what do you call them, forbidden doors of promotional companies, because of the Saudis, they're kind of non-existent right now, right? They're non-existent. All these PBC guys are fighting all over the place. Canelo's Prime Video on Amazon with PBC. He fought a Golden Boy fighter in his last fight, and then now he's fighting a Matchroom fighter in his next fight, and both fights, these last 2 fights, have been in conjunction with DAZN. So, I think Al Heyman's realizing, hey, I can't do the same thing that I did with Showtime. I just can't. So, so that's why he's I have to work across the aisle and let these guys also get a piece of the pie, and then they'll put some money in. He's and then I got to deliver for Canelo Alvarez because he's a superstar. So, yeah, man, Crawford and Canelo still on the table. We'll see what happens, obviously, in the future. Canelo fights in September next month. I believe this week they had, this week they had the kickoff press conference in New York City for Canelo and Berlanga. I saw some clips. I saw some little highlights. There wasn't really out of the ordinary, unless I missed something. Was there anything intriguing? Or was it a pretty standard press conference, right?
Yeah, pretty standard press conference. Doesn't really seem to have that Canelo glitz and glamour about it yet.
Right. I think we touched on this before, but people are like, oh, you shouldn't fight Berlanga and stuff. I mean, I think that's fair criticism for that. But I think I mentioned last week and before that Canelo and Eddie Hearn are actually really good friends. Like, ever since he left Oscar de la Hoya, him and Eddie Hearn have become really good friends. Remember when Canelo was down there at the San Diego fight? I think it was Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. They did an interview in the ring. It was Eddie Hearn, Chris Mannix, and Canelo. And then Chris Mannix asked Canelo something, and then he pointed at Eddie Hearn. He's like, "Oh, it's this guy." He's like, "I like this guy." And then they hugged and stuff. Like, he's like, "Oh, yeah, this guy's my friend." Like, I mean, him fighting Berlanga is also like a helping hand to Eddie Hearn in Matchroom. He's like, "Hey, I want you in on the pot, because I like you guys, because Canelo obviously has the leverage." So, there's always, you can read between the lines and a lot of stuff like that, and just kind of have some type of understanding right there. Moving on to the co-main event, probably the most emotional fight, especially for the victor of the night. Jose Rayo Valenzuela gets the split decision and now becomes the WBA super lightweight champion of the world as he defeats Isaac Cruz, who takes the third loss of his career and loses his WBA super lightweight championship. Valenzuela wins by scores of 116, 112 twice, and then 113, 115 for Cruz. Valenzuela, remember last week we were stuck on this fight? And I asked you when we started previewing it, I was like, hey, doesn't he train with Garcia? And then you said, no, he trains, I forgot who you said, but he trains with somebody else. Yeah, he was in Phoenix with Benavidez. And then I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I could have swore I saw Garcia. And as we were still discussing it, you looked it up, and then you're like, oh, he does train with Garcia. And I said that was the X factor for me, was Robert Garcia and the Robert Garcia gym. And when you verified it during that conversation that he was trained by Robert Garcia, I think we both then had a solidified pick and picked Valenzuela. Like, I think, we're tipping the hand to him and he's going to take it. And it was a good fight. It was an entertaining fight. Obviously, very hard fight. One card went to Cruz. The other two went to Valenzuela. And Cruz is just one of those, he really is like a pit bull. Just kind of swings for the fences all the time. But Valenzuela literally boxed him. And I think he kind of had some type of blueprint in a way of how to defeat somebody like Cruz, who just kind of comes forward and throws those just heavy, heavy hands. I mean, what did you think about the fight? You were right there ringside.
I think you described it pretty well. I thought it was going to be a bit of a firefight, but probably rightly, or definitely rightly, because he ended up winning. Rayo decided to box, and Cruz at times managed to break him down, and Rayo had to back up, but he just kind of stuck to the game plan. And just like we said, he said it in the ring afterwards. What's the change? What is it? And he said, these two men stood next to me, Robert Garcia and his other coach. Was it Coach Rodriguez? I think.
I believe so.
They're what changed him around, because look at his record previously. He had a couple of defeats. Obviously goes to Robert Garcia's gym, turns that around, rights one of the wrongs, and then now he's no world champion. And it was great to watch, because look at him.
He was so emotional.
It was super good to watch. To look somebody who just probably knew what he'd done and how it had changed his career, and that now changed his life, because he's going to be getting.
And Garcia was just as happy too. I mean, he's been like that with other fighters when they got world championships, they got the win. Garcia's right there, screaming, so. But yeah, that whole team was you could see Valenzuela was just happy. He was like, "Yeah, I did." It goes to his knees right when they announced him as the winner. What
a gym!
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to that question, do belts matter? they matter to fighters. They do. But I think there's so much politics with these sanctioning bodies for these belts that it muddies the waters, to take like a legal term, in this conversation. But I think when you get to a point where your financial power far exceeds your championship caliber talent, like, oh, I've been champion multiple times, but like you're so good that, like, that's what they say about Tank Davis. Leonard Ellerby and PBC would always say, like, oh yeah, we don't, yeah, he's multi-division champion, but like he sells out these stadiums and stuff, like he's box office. And I get it, sometimes, that's the biggest stars are always the ones that draw the most money. But for somebody like Valenzuela is a prime example that, you have to work your way up to this level and then get that world title, because that world title will change your life. And then it'll start giving you more opportunities, more financial doors might open. And then if you keep winning and retaining that title, it'll just increase your stock little by little by little. So once again, I repeat, do belts matter, or is it kind of hard to answer definitively? What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, at the minute, belts still matter because they sell the fight, on the posters, for the TV. Once you get to someone like a Floyd Mayweather or like a Canelo standard, you can pick and choose the big fights because everybody knows who you are and you know that you're the best in the business. But when you're coming up, you need them just to solidify yourself to us, You're like, who is this guy? Like, oh, he's got a world championship. Oh, well, he must be good, and then you want to see them. But yeah, so at the minute, unfortunately, they still do matters. And I know, obviously, a lot of people are like, oh, bin the belts. There's too many. Fucking, we don't know who the world champion is. But for fighters, they dream about it. They dream about probably wearing the WBC green belt, and at the same time, you get championship money.
Exactly. So, Cruz, who defended his title a couple times, loses the title here. But he still put on a great effort. So how much, focusing on Cruz, how much does this affect his chances at the rematch against Tank Davis? Because obviously Al Heyman was working towards that fight. So did they just miss the boat? And they, that fight will probably still happen sometime in the future, but how much does this affect that rematch now?
For the PBC, probably not much, because some of the wacky fights that we've seen put on.
No, right. But I mean, like,
Andre Berto coming back, Robert Guerrero randomly popping up on a card.
That was insane, huh?
And then I think you could probably, I was in the stadium, so I heard it. I'm sure you heard it on the TV. Isaac Cruz fans, a lot of the people who turned up to see Isaac Cruz because Rayo. Oh yeah, and he was loudly booed. So Isaac, luckily for him, he sells tickets. People want to see him fight, and that's what makes boxing go around. That money makes boxing go around. And if you sell tickets and you have a fan base, you get the big fights.
Right. No, yeah. And Cruz has always been like a good fighter. I think he got lucky when he got the Davis fight, because like Davis was supposed to fight who in LA at that time at Staples Center, and then didn't Cruz get put in as a substitution, or am I wrong?
When Rolly got in trouble with the law?
Oh, I think it was Rolly. Yeah, and then Cruz slid in. So he obviously took advantage of that opportunity because it was a good fight, and he put on a great effort. And he's obviously made the most of it since then. He became champion. He's been winning. He's shown the Mexican style, so he's gained fans. But honestly, I don't think it's going to happen next, but I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch between him and Valenzuela here, and then I also want to call out DAZN on their YouTube channel. When they put the highlights of this fight, They called him Jose Venezuela, so they spelled it with an E. Actually, they completely spelled it wrong in terms of the middle letters, but it's Valenzuela. But I mean, it is what it is. I can be a lot more nitpicky, but I'm not. But yeah, going back to Rayo Valenzuela, just the emotion that he exhibited and showed, going to his knees, winning, then hugging his team, and him and Garcia just like yelling at each other, and then him just screaming like, "Yeah, I did it." I mean, good for him, man. You always like to see when, because sometimes you see these guys who win their first world championship, and and like they're happy, but not everybody has the same personality, so everybody's going to be different. But like it's cool to see as a spectator. It's cool and it's like heartwarming to see these guys show that much emotion, because you can tell that all the blood, sweat, and tears and the hard work that they did to get to this point, to get this first world title, like you saw it come out all right there when his name was announced. So that's always cool to see in combat sports, whether it's MMA or boxing. It's always very, very humbling to see. So congratulations to Rayo Valenzuela on being the new world champion at 135 pounds. Yeah, right? It's 135? That's where Cruz had a title, right? So yeah, Rayo Valenzuela, you never know. I mean, do you think that this kind of puts Valenzuela in a Tank Davis pathway? I'm sure Al Heyman and Tank Davis are going to look at it like, oh, we can fight this guy. Like Cruz would have brought a fan base, but Valenzuela, Mexican with Robert Garcia, it also works, right?
100%. Yeah, he'll be supported well. I think hopefully he can kind of steal some of those Cruz fans after that good performance.
Yeah.
Because he was very modest afterwards, spoke really well. He didn't tell the fans to, shut up or anything like that,
Oh, yeah. And then Ryan Garcia was tweeting saying, hey, he'll fight him. I mean,
right.
Ryan, then somebody it was kind of funny, right? Somebody asked Ryan, like, you can't even fight in the States. And he was like, yeah, but I can fight outside the States. I was like, Jesus, like, this guy's nuts. So, yeah, but congratulations to Valenzuela on his first world title at 135 pounds. Moving on, David Morrell remains undefeated at 11-0 with the 12-round unanimous decision win over Hot Rod, who takes the third loss of his career. This was for the WBA Light Heavyweight Championship of the World. Morrell wins by scores of 117-111 twice and 118-110. What do you think about Morrell's win, and what does his future hold?
Yeah, I don't think it was the fight we were all expecting. Most Morrell fights are pretty explosive. This guy's kind of went back and forth, back and forth. I thought Hot Rod looked pretty good, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. He actually looked way better than I thought. I didn't think he was going to.
Yeah, I thought he looked real good in there. And definitely not the kind of explosive performance I think Morrell, expected. I think he thought he was going to get in there, knock Hot Rod out on this kind of big stage. I think there was probably a few people, maybe because this was pretty well selected matchups, but I think there was probably a few people that kind of thought they were going to get on there on this big stage and knock somebody out on pay-per-view and make a name for themselves. But unfortunately, he didn't. If anything, like you say, I think Hot Rod probably came out looking the best, because I don't think people expected such a good performance from him.
Right.
But yeah, onward and upwards, hopefully for Morrell. I think still backed. He's still got that, Cuban fan base. So I think, he'll be back in there, and I think they'll probably try to use him somewhere on the East Coast in the future.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Maybe Florida or something like that.
Yeah.
Big Cuban population over there. Also on the card, Andy Ruiz, former unified heavyweight champion of the world, fights to a majority draw, over Jarrell Big Baby Miller. The scores are 116-112 and then 114-114 Weiss. Obviously, we previewed this last week. We gave our take. What'd you think about the matchup?
It was all right. It's back and forth, but because of both huge heavyweights, super overweight, there wasn't a lot of punches thrown, and as we expected, I think Jarrell
Miller's just a ginormous guy, man. 300 something pounds, like
305 pounds. his punch output was supposedly down 20 punches a round ever since he's now not on the juice.
Right.
That's something to go by. And Andy Ruiz just looks washed up. He just looks like he's literally there for a payday.
I mean, like I think he still gives it a shot, but I mean, just like anything, the money did change him, and I think that's, it did happen. It changed him. He made life-changing money, and after that, he's like, kind of cruise control. I mean, I don't know. I think he's still going to keep fighting. He's still making money and stuff like that, but. Are they going to rematch?
I mean, I would roll out of bed if I was him for $1 million for this fight.
Yeah.
Just like you said, they're still paying him super good money. He broke his hand, but apart from that, he lived to fight.
Yeah, didn't he say he broke his hand in the 5th round?
He broke his hand. Round. And then went to hospital, had that fixed, and he didn't lose. So like you say, there's probably another $1 million payday there.
Right. Yeah, they're going to probably run this back sometime, I would think, right? I mean, like who else is there for them? I mean, obviously they still have some type of name, but going back to how we were talking about the last couple of fights, who gets more of the stock? I think Miller got a lot more of the stock here because, like, the past that he's had with the juicing and the New York when he lost the AJ fight and all that, and just him being suspended and being gone from boxing on the big stage for so long, and now coming back and then fighting to a draw against a former world heavyweight champion. In LA against Andy Ruiz, I think Miller got a little bit more stock. I don't think he went down in his stock. He went up. I mean, obviously he would have went higher if he won, but who comes out of here? Who comes out of that fight looking with having the lower stock?
I think you nailed it, Miller. I think Miller's stock improved because the calls of why is he on the card? He's a fucking drugs tree, kind of slowly disappeared, and luckily for him, he's a heavyweight. Turkey Al-Sheikh loves heavyweights. And
big fan.
Yeah, and conveniently, Miller's now a Muslim.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, shocking turn of events, for him to, go out and fight.
Do you think, I mean, like, I don't want to go down such a crazy road, but do you think there's any financial incentive behind it? It's like, oh, man, if I do this, the Saudis are always going to put me on a card.
100%.
Like, I don't want to, I mean, I'm sure you want to think the best and say that he really found whatever he wants to believe in and stuff, but you never know. Boxing is such a crazy sport. you just don't know.
The things people will do for money. Like, look at the amount of what he got. Turkey Al-Sheikh got inducted into the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame.
Yeah, like the first honorary induction. That was nuts.
He's been in and around boxing for like a year. When you've got boxers that have given their life and soul and family and money and everything, who've never been inducted.
I mean, he's the king right now in terms of the paychecks. So they're just like, maybe he'll give us money to support the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame.
100%. That's what it is. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the nature of the game, right? I know there's going to be people listening who are insulted by that, but I mean, we're just speculating.
We're just saying what most people are thinking. Everyone,
we're just speculating.
In the crowd was saying it.
Like, boxing is a big time. There's a lot of boxing politics and a lot of financial. I mean, the sports have been in a lot of financial trouble for many years. Last decade or so, and it is what it is. It is what it is. Also, another heavyweight matchup. Martin Bakole KOs Jared Anderson in the 5th round, who takes the first loss of his career here, and he is now 17-1. Who did we choose last week when we talked about this fight? I know I think you chose Bakole. Did I choose Anderson?
Yeah. I think we were actually split on quite a few of these fights. You might have picked Anderson, yeah.
I think I picked Anderson.
It was.
But you know what? No, I think I don't know, because I know we started talking about that Anderson had that, his recent legal problems and had like that car chase with the police and all that. Like, is he still the same guy? Is it different? I can't remember who I picked, but I'm pretty sure you picked Bakole, right?
Yeah, I picked Bakole just because, there's a couple of things. the amount of heavyweights that have been in sparring with Bohachuk and came out just singing his praises. And then also, like you said, Anderson's had a lot of distractions away from it. And then having that interview with Roy Jones Jr. where he pretty much broke down in tears, didn't he? Saying that like all of the stress that's on him and providing for his family, and he doesn't really like boxing. He just wants to get in there and get some money and get out. And boxing's a very unforgiving sport for somebody that's not 100% in it and is already thinking about leaving and essentially has like 1 foot out of the door. And I think Jared Anderson found out a cold, hard truth, unfortunately, on Saturday.
No, exactly. I mean, for Anderson, how old is he? Mid-20s?
24, super young.
24. So, I mean, he still has it. It's obviously better to get your first loss. Is it better to get your first loss? I mean, I guess it's arguable how you look at it, but having your first loss early in your career isn't. Canelo lost to Floyd Mayweather in 2013.
I think with we don't know him, but looking from the outside, like his mentality and the stuff that he said, yes, I think it is. I think he was just starting to believe his own hype because people like Tyson Fury and those guys were talking about how good he was and how he's, a big guy, but he's agile and stuff like that. So I think maybe this brought him back down to earth. Well, let's kind of hope it did, because like you just touched on, he's got like 10, maybe more than 10 years, because in his career, I mean, if you look at all the people at the top of the division now, they're all in their mid to late 30s, because heavyweights just mature later, because you're still growing and filling out, and
right.
You're facing guys that are 6'5", 6'7", 280 pounds.
Right.
So, Jared Anderson's got a lot of time. He could go and disappear and live life and kind of recover and come back in 2 years, and he's still going to be young for the heavyweight division.
No, exactly. Yeah. So, I think he'll be fine. Well, assuming that, this loss doesn't affect them too much, because obviously we've seen that, or they take their first loss and it's just too much, like it really affects them like significantly. And, like you said, you mentioned the Roy Jones Jr. thing, how he was, providing for his family. He had a lot of stress. Then he had the legal troubles. Like, I mean, you don't know. Like, you just don't know. You want to hope for the best for the guy. He's 24 years old. But, we'll find out as time goes forward. But, let's see if he's able to bounce back. Rounding off the card, Andy Cruz, the Olympian. He's also Cuban, right? 4-0. Gets the 7th round knockout over Antonio Moran, who takes the 7th loss of his career. This was for the IBF International Lightweight Championship. Andy Cruz at 4-0, very highly touted amateur, and he signed with Matchroom, obviously. This was, you were, like I mentioned, you were ringside. This is your first time, I believe, seeing him in person like that. What did you think seeing somebody like Andy Cruz, and when does he get a world title fight? Because he's obviously on that track like a Lomachenko and those guys, like maybe the first 7 fights, they get him into a world title fight. What do you think?
I mean, I expected a little bit more from him. Maybe I'm just being harsh because of like how talented he is. I thought he would have got Moran out of there a little bit earlier, but Moran is a seasoned veteran. He's been in there with the likes of Jermaine Ortiz, Arnold Barboza, Devin Haney, Jose Pedraza. So he's been in there with a load of people that we know and, high-level guys. But, I just thought with Andy Cruz being as good as he is and experiences, I thought he would have got him out there a little bit earlier. It was the 7th round, so maybe I'm just asking too much, but that's just how good that he is. And I think, just trying to get to a world title shot, I think it's just going to be hard because of the division that he's in. When you look at like the names that are in there, Davis, Shakur Stevenson, Zepeda, Lomachenko, I think he's good enough to get there. It's just trying to get himself into that position. But if you look at him now, he's 4-0. He's already, won a few international titles. Like this fight we're talking about now was for the IBF International. So I would assume he's obviously trying to position himself with the IBF so he can, get a title shot. Obviously, the title holder at the minute is Lomachenko. So give me that. Lomachenko against Andy Cruz, 2 very similar styles. So that would be an amazing fight. But it looks like we're probably going to see Loma in there at the end of the year with Shakur Stevenson, since they kind of had a little lovers tiff in the crowd.
I mean, maybe, but I also feel that Stevenson doesn't want to give Top Rank any, or ESPN. He doesn't want to give them any piece of the pie, especially how they kind of left on bad terms and how ESPN panned to the crowd to say, oh, they're all leaving, I don't know. Maybe Stevenson would be like, oh, no, I'll fight you. I mean, obviously Lomachenko wasn't afraid. He's like, they had their little thing in the crowd, like you said. But I think Stevenson's like, I think rightly so, he should focus on Tank Davis, especially since Cruz lost. Because I honestly think, you tell me if I'm wrong here, I honestly think that if Davis, Davis doesn't have a scheduled fight right now, right?
No.
I think that Al Heyman and Tank Davis were waiting for Cruz to win, and then they were going to make that fight by the end of the year. The rematch between Davis and Cruz. But Cruz losing kind of elevated Stevenson like, oh, well, he's a free agent. I mean, that's a tough fight. That'll probably be the toughest fight of Davis's career. So,
just to clarify, you talk about Andy Cruz, right? Because there's two Cruzes.
No, I'm talking about Isaac Cruz. Because this is lightweight.
Isaac Cruz, yes.
Yeah, this is the lightweight division.
Yeah.
135. So, I mean, because, we're talking about Lomachenko. We brought up Lomachenko's name and stuff like that. If Cruz is kind of the same on the same track. But then you mentioned how Lomachenko and Stevenson had their little spat in the audience at the event at BMO Stadium this past Saturday. But staying within the lightweight division at 135, Isaac Cruz lost in the co-main event
at 140.
What?
At 140.
Oh, that was a 140 fight, super lightweight.
He stepped up to face Rolly.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. But don't you think that Davis and Mal Heyman and PBC were, maybe that was the plan? Like, hey, Cruz wins, we'll make the rematch by the end of the year.
Probably.
And then he lost, so they're like, oh crap, what do we do now? Like, they have to focus their sights on Stevenson, right?
Yeah, but then obviously Turkey Al-Sheikh kind of said, didn't he, at the event? I don't know if it was on TV, but he'd spoken to Zepeda, he'd spoken to Shakur, and verbally they'd agreed it. Obviously, there's no pen to paper, so it could still fall through. But Shakur,
I think that's a fun fight too, though.
Oh, great, because Zepeda's just all action.
No, right. I think that's a fun fight. So, but I think, as a boxing fan, what would you rather see? And they're both good fights, but what would you rather see selfishly? Tank Davis versus Stevenson or Zepeda versus Stevenson?
Probably because the build-up would be good and the Davis and Stevenson.
Yeah. They're, they have bigger names and stuff like that. Like, yeah.
They probably, and they've sparred, so they kind of know each other. So they're stepping in the ring, and there's probably not going to be like too much of a feeling out process. It's going to be like ding,
you would hope not. You would hope not, but you never know.
Right.
Yeah. But moving on, fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 10th of August, from the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, on DAZN. DAZN, telling you, they're taking over, man. Vergil Ortiz Jr. returns to the ring undefeated at 21-0 versus Serhii Bohachuk 24-1 for the WBC Interim Super Welterweight Championship of the World. What do you think about this matchup?
I think it's going to be great whilst it lasts. I think very good kind of stylistic matchup. I think for Vergil Ortiz, I think Serhii Bohachuk is unfortunately probably man-made for him. I think he's big, he's strong, not too elusive, and I think someone who moves a lot and is more stylish and a slick boxer is going to be someone which gives Vergil Ortiz problems, because he's very come forward, heavy-handed type of fighter. So I think it's someone like that is going to be his kryptonite. So I think Serhii Bohachuk is, unfortunately, I think tailor-made, and I think it's probably going to be a very good performance from Ortiz, and I think he's going to take him out probably 5 or 6 rounds. I think we probably see Ortiz by KO or TKO, and then for someone...
It's going to be a fun fight, though. It should be a fun fight.
Yeah, exactly. But not too sure why we need an interim champion when we've got an active WBC champion. But it is.
Well, that goes. I mean, like that just it's just like a revolving door. Like that goes back to what we talked about earlier. Do belts matter? Like there's a lot of politics there. Like, it's like, like they're the interim champion, but like they give them an actual physical belt, so they hold it up, and then like there's casual fans like, oh, that guy's a world champion. Oh, kind of. It's like he's just kind of. It's just kind of like a contender. Like, oh yeah, he's next in line, so he's interim. Like, it's very confusing. It's very confusing. But these sanctioning bodies want their fee.
Poor Fundora has got to pick between. You can either fight Terence Crawford because he's got the WBO,
or Vergil Ortiz,
or Vergil Ortiz. You're like,
well, I mean, like think about it. Those three, like, when's the last time 154 has been like? Those are all intriguing matchups.
It's been stagnant, hasn't it? If we've been honest, it's been stagnant.
So those three right there, those are all intriguing matchups. If Crawford fights Ortiz, that's a fun fight. If Crawford fights Fundora, that's a fun fight. If Fundora fights Crawford, that's a fun fight. If Ortiz fights Fundora, that's a fun fight. Like these are fun fights.
Fun fight, Fundora.
Yeah. I mean, they're fun fights, man. Those three right there are like, can fight each other for like a good year and a half, maybe.
We can dream.
I mean, they're gonna have to, right? They're gonna have to. Ortiz just moved up to 154, and Crawford just moved up to 154. So, if Canelo doesn't come to the table with Crawford, like it's Ortiz and Fundora in terms of some money. So, I think it's a lot more attainable than you think. So. That's on Saturday in Mandalay in Las Vegas. So if you're out there in Vegas this weekend, want to watch some boxing, go check it out. Also on that card, Cecilia Brækhus, 37-2-1, goes up against Marisela Cornejo, 19-6. This is also on the undercard of Vergil Ortiz and Serhii Bohachuk. And also this upcoming weekend from Albuquerque, New Mexico. This might be the first time we've ever mentioned this site as a fight. Maybe I'm wrong. I think we've touched on it before for New Mexico, but from the Tingley Coliseum in Albuquerque, New Mexico on ESPN Plus, 30-2, Luis Alberto Lopez goes up against Angelo Leo, 24-1 for the IBF Featherweight Championship of the World. This should be a pretty fun fight too, right?
I mean, yeah, a big fan of watching Luis Alberto Lopez. Such a fun style. You just don't know where the punches are going to come from. Very unorthodox, but it's it's good to watch. And if you're fighting against him, you just can't really plan from it because he's not got the traditional style that you're kind of used to, where you can kind of anticipate when and where a punch is going to come from. Luis Lopez, you just can't, and that's why I think he's so good to watch.
And then moving on to news and notes section of this week's episode of the Last Round podcast. Bob Arum, chairman and CEO of Top Rank Boxing, told Lance Pugmire, formerly of the LA Times, and I think now he's with PPV.com, that WBO super featherweight champion Emmanuel Navarette has a mandated rematch with Oscar Valdez that would land in Glendale, Arizona's Desert Diamond Arena on December 7th of this year. The same venue hosted their first fight and also hosts Jaime Munguia's Top Rank debut just before December, in a couple months from today. Hey, is Arizona, that greater Phoenix area, is that like the new hotbed now of boxing? Arizona has no state taxes over here in the United States. It's close enough to Southern California. There's a lot of California people who have moved to that area. So, I think Phoenix, that greater Phoenix area is slowly creeping up, right?
Yeah, man, I'm guessing they must be doing a site fee, or they're just not charging promoters anything to use their stadium, because like you say, they've gone from hardly having any fights to, regularly getting like matchroom shows, top rank shows. So whatever they're doing it right.
I mean, think about it. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but like in the last couple of years, especially since COVID, Phoenix has probably had more fights than LA has, at least in terms of like significant matchups.
Well, yeah, Sonny Edwards has been there twice.
Yeah.
Jacobs and Chavez was there when me and you went.
Yeah. Benavidez.
Yeah. Benavidez has been there, and then these two upcoming fights. So, yeah, I mean, Jesse Rodriguez.
I mean, I know LA gets a lot of like smaller fights in terms of like bang for your, like, there's a lot of fights out here that people don't hear about. You know, there's a lot more people out here. I understand that. But in terms of like eyeballs and significant fights that are like a little bit bigger in terms of marquee, that greater Phoenix area in Arizona is really, it's coming up.
Yeah, I know that with the Honda Center, which is Anaheim for our UK fans.
Yeah. Or Disneyland
signed
is that.
a deal with the UFC and WWE. So once they've done that rejuvenation around the Angel Stadium.
Yeah. The baseball team.
Yeah, so once that's finished, they're going to be holding, I think, 3 or 4 UFC fights there. And I think for 3 years, I think WWE is coming there as well.
I mean, you got to think about it that the city of Anaheim probably because, you know, obviously California has, you know, state taxes, but there's high tax rates over here. Arizona doesn't, Texas doesn't. So, you know, business, in terms of businesses, a lot of them go to those states, and, you know, especially fights and stuff, you get to keep a little bit more of your money for these fighters. But the city of Anaheim, I'm assuming Anaheim, California, where the Honda Center's at, Disneyland's there, and then the baseball team, the Anaheim Angels, are also there. I'm sure the city, I would assume that they talked to the UFC and WWE and the company TKO and kind of like, you know, gave them some tax breaks, right? Like some local tax breaks or some local incentives. Like, hey, look, like, we can't help you like on the state tax, but like we can help you on the local tax, on the incentives. You know, we'll help you with this or that. We'll try to offset the impact. So, because for TKO to strike a deal with a Southern California city like that, that's pretty big, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, great for me and you.
yeah. It's not that far right there, you know, general area. You know, so yeah, it's definitely great. Definitely great. Also, Alicia Baumgartner will defend her WBC super featherweight title against Delphine Persoon on September 27th in Atlanta, Georgia, headlining an all-women's fight card on Brinks TV, BRINX.TV, and Fubo Sports, FUBO Sports. The event is supposedly set to be in an immersive world environment. What does that mean?
Good question.
Like a VR thing?
I'm not too sure. And if I'm being honest, it's all women's card. I mean, like, honestly, you got to give it to them in terms of like some type of incentive to watch. If they're saying, oh, you know, an immersive world environment, if it's VR or if it's this or that, there might be some people like, oh, I kind of want to tune in just to see what that's about. I mean, think about it. Marketing wise, I don't know whether it was a purse bid that Eddie Hearn lost, because I think she still has a couple of fights left with Matchroom and DAZN. Right. Not too sure why she's on, you know, those two lesser TV type of channels. And I mean, maybe they just didn't have too many options for her. And she told Eddie Hearn, like, hey, I got this opportunity. And he's like, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. You know, he can afford to let that happen because she's, you know, it's different. Yeah. And she's one of the more fun female fighters to watch. So, exactly. Fight though. Delphine Persoon, she's game. And she's been in there with some good fighters. If you remember, I think, was it the first fight with Katie Taylor? Right. A lot of people had Delphine Persoon winning because she's that active. That's right. Yeah. That's probably what put her like on the map in terms of female boxing. Was that on the undercard of AJ Ruiz 1? New York? I don't know. I think it might have been. It might have been. I think it might have been. I mean, Katie Taylor, Irish. New York has a big Irish population. Yeah. Maybe. It might have been on the undercard of that. Yeah, I can see that. I could definitely see that. You never know. Thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Before we sign off, as we always do for this week, Mike, go ahead and let them know where they can find us and follow us. We are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter, and be sure to join us next week. We'll be reviewing all the fighters that we just spoke about, and then looking forward to a bit of a quiet week. We have Christian Umbele against Sergey Derevchenko coming from Canada. So for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is the Last Round Podcast.